Anna McLaughlin is my guest on today's show, and what a story of provision she has. From being a corporate lawyer to deciding, I want to spend more time with the family while providing financially in a new and different way. Here is Anna's story. What inspires me about her story is that she and her husband worked together on identifying, hey, there's a gap here from where I am today to where I want to be. And they demonstrated patience, which I think is so valuable in all of our provider journeys, where we might have this vision and inspiration to enjoy God's provision or to give God's provision in a new and exciting way, but it's just not there yet. And she shows how through some intentional decisions, conversations, you can get there. It just may take a little bit more time, but the rewards are worth the effort. So enjoy this conversation with my new friend, Anna. Anna, welcome to the podcast. And I wanted to start off by asking you about Proverbs 31. It's the name of your coaching business. It's the influence and inspiration behind your podcast. So what about that verse stands out to you?
Yeah, so I feel like my life's work is encapsulated in that verse. I was always a smart kid. I went to law school, became a corporate attorney, and worked in mergers and acquisitions and commercial contracts. So big law, big deals, big responsibilities, and then this big heart for my family and my home. And so reckoning those two aspects of myself felt impossible at times. This ability to tussle with complex contracts and being in law school and all of the kind of head knowledge that was required for that, and then this desire to nurture and nourish our small nuclear family. And I think in academia there's this call on women especially to give your excellence to the world, that there's this invitation to say, like, that's how you really own your place as a woman. And yet my heart was home with, at the time, this tiny little baby that I wanted to take care of, my firstborn. And so I left law altogether. I started raising my children, but there was still that lawyer piece of me. And so the Proverbs 31 verse, she considers a field and she buys it. To me, it just captures the journey that the Lord has had me on to go, yes, be home. Yes, have your husband and your children rise up and call you blessed. And yes, consider the field and buy it and work with the linens and send them far on boats and all of that there's a way to be both. And it requires submission to the Lordship of Christ that we can do it. But for me, it's been quite the arc to kind of get to that point of how am I both things at the same time?
Well, take us back to that moment. I love it when the whole theme of needing a provider is because there's a need, right? And so take
Right.
us back to the moment where you have this tension of, I'm a corporate lawyer, but I also feel called to home. How did you
Yes.
go about making that decision?
So I actually hired a coach myself. It's part of my heart for coaching. 12 years ago, when I was home on maternity leave, I hired a life coach, and she gave me a homework assignment that I never forgot, which she said, write down your ideal day. And so I took some time, and I still remember saying to her, well, it must be a weekend because we're waking up without our alarm clock. And then detailed this day that was filled with simply being present together, growing with one another. We were reading books, we were going on adventures, and it was a very small life, but a very connected life and a beautiful one. And that became my blueprint for what we wanted. It was the first time in my life that I had asked, that I had shifted from the utilitarian view of my life of what am I good at? What can I do for other people? And given myself permission to go, what do I want in this one beautiful life? And that actually that is a question that is very valuable to the heart of God, that we give ourselves permission to uncover how he made us and what we would love to do with our lives, because ultimately that's what the world needs, is for us to do what we were born to do.
Hmm. What a good, challenging life coach question about what your ideal day is.
Yes. Yes, it was.
And so you hire a coach while on maternity leave. That seems to be an intentional decision. What prompted that? Did you have someone else in your life that recommended it, or how did you go about that?
So if I remember correctly, my doula, my birth coach for my firstborn, Cora, had made the connection for me. We so my husband and I have a lot of vision, a lot of desire, but not always. We're not planners per se, and so he had always said, just get through maternity leave with Cora and then you can quit. And I remember being like, I don't think we can do that. I don't think I can, because I was earning about 3/4 of our family's income. It was just this big old, they give you a lot of money when you practice law. You pay for it, but they give you a lot. Right. And um, so I remember this moment in our marriage that, where I had listed out all of our expenses and we were out of money before groceries. And I kind of handed him this piece of paper and I was like, well, here's what I see on paper. And it was one of those moments that I think women can so connect with, where it's like, I was waiting for the white horse. I was waiting for him to kind of ride up and go, but you forgot, there's this pot of gold or whatever it was. And he just looked at me and I saw in his face, like, we don't have a plan. Like, we can't do this. And so it was this real crisis moment of, I've built a life that no longer works. I went to the school and I got the degree and I'm earning the income, and we had been careful to live below our means, but not enough, right? We hadn't kind of figured it all out yet. And so it was from that place of crisis of, I don't know what to do now, because there's not an easy answer, right? It's not just a quick moment's decision. And it took us, I did leave. It took 2 years for us to leave, and it was still quite the jump out of the airplane moment. But there was a lot of work that needed to happen in me, and there was a lot of growth that needed to happen in just our understanding of how what do we want, first of all? What do we want? And then how do we get there and walk that out? So yeah, it really came from a place of, I guess, crisis, that place of, I don't know what to do with this, very emotional state that I'm in. I'm postpartum, right, with my first baby, and this reckoning of the life I have built doesn't work with who I have become in this very short amount of time of becoming a mother.
Wow. How did those 2 years feel? Was it a grind? Was it long? Just that when you said 2 years from the time that you had this hope birthed in you, like, meaning, you're pregnant, but also, like, your husband says, "Don't go back, baby, like, you were gonna go." And then you look at the numbers, being the lawyer, and you say, "Actually, this is not gonna work out." And I
Yeah.
was curious how that 2-year waiting period was from the time you had that initial conversation with your husband to when you eventually left that career.
Yeah. So it was one of those. I mean, it's why I have the mission that I do and the heart that I do, to help women of God really own their purpose and walk in the life that they feel called to live, because of everything that came during that time. There was so much that needed to be birthed in me, that needed to be kind of like, honed and refined. My husband would say things like, well, once you leave your lawyer job, we can't do these weekends away. We can't pay for all this kind of natural health stuff. And every time this flesh would rise up in me and go, but I still want to pay for all of that. I still want to do everything just like we did. I didn't want anything to die, right? And you have to have a death to have a rebirth every time. And so that was so important and so hard. The other piece that the Lord really grew in me was that, no matter what, contentment. That place of, like, if I am here, then there's a way to do it joyfully. And so he really stretched my capacity during that time to help me be in a place that I had decided long before I didn't want to be in anymore, and be there well, with grace, with compassion, with love, serve my clients, serve the work, serve my colleagues, and even just leaving well. One of the things that my husband was willing for me to do, which was a big deal for us financially, is, the 2-year mark was actually the birth of our second son, or our second child, a son. And I had, and here I am trying to, like, walk this whole thing out well. And I remember my husband would actually sleep on top of the covers with the lights on while I was working. I would work from, roughly, I'd come home at about 3 or 4. I went 3/4 time. And then I'd spend the evening with my family. My daughter would go to bed at 6:30, which, looking back, I'm like, my kids are still running around at 10 o'clock right now. I can't believe how good we had it. But she would go to bed at 6:30, and then I'd work till midnight. And my husband would eventually, you know, just lie down on top of the covers in solidarity. And I remember one night just frustrated walking in and saying, listen, I'm not doing another one of these baby things like with this job. So if you want another kid, we are not, like, I'm out before the baby's born. And that's what we did. I quit. I gave them a month's notice, and the last day was 2 weeks before my due date. So we gave up that maternity leave, which was a lot. It was a lot to give up, but my husband really was willing for me to. I was like, I have to leave well, right? I have to leave well. I can't sit through a 4-month maternity leave pretending I'm going back when I know that I'm not. And so each of those decisions really had to be. I had to become someone other than what I had been before in order to be able to be the woman who could leave. Because we still didn't know what we were doing when we left fully. We were like, well, we'll see. I don't know. We can go live in my mom's basement. We'll figure it out.
Wow. And you knew that you wanted to invest more in your family. So that was the idea here. You're going to leave the corporate law firm and you're going to invest in the family and potentially have more kids because you said, I'm out. I'm not doing anymore with this schedule.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So yes, we have 4 children now. And that's what we knew. Just we knew because my husband would say, what do you want to do? And I couldn't put words around it. Um, so we looked at different like career services, or could I do like a more, family friendly law work or what? But what I really wanted was to be home, and that's what I knew then. And so that's where we started. Is I just came home, right? And I had a little story that it wasn't okay for me to work. That somehow that was I wasn't faithful if I was working. So that's why She Considers a Field has become such an important cornerstone for me in my faith and in my identity, because owning that piece, owning the piece of me that is a lawyer, that is smart, that loves, wrangling with ideas and engaging with the world around me. I laid that down for a season when I first started staying home. And so, picking that back up has been a piece of my journey as well.
I often find during these moments of transition that it's helpful to have people provide for you in some practical way. Were there any mentors or authors that really spoke to you during this time of, transitioning with your career and exploring what does it mean? How do I still leverage this training that I have in some way, but still be at home?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the one of the main voices for me during that time was actually a secular author, Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And so in that he talks about the power of entrepreneurship to create an investment, to create space in your life. And given that I had, I'd worked the big job that paid well but required me to be there, all hours potentially, depending on what was going on. The decision to leave was really one to say, I'm trading money for time. But then, as my husband would say, well, we got to live too. How are we going to do that? And so Robert Kiyosaki's conversation about investment, about business endeavors, even he had a subset of that book, kind of a spinoff that he wrote, that was about the power of direct sales and that kind of marketing structure as a business opportunity, that was so really transformative for me, to help me go, okay, I can be home and I can still be out there. But that out there work, the work in the world, can be secondary to my family. And that was something that I hadn't really been able to piece together in law, but in business, you know, wherever you go, there you are. So I still had my own type A personality to work through, but there was this opportunity to say, okay, my family can truly come first, because this can be secondary by design.
Wow. I love it. That's great. I love
That
this,
was great.
the voices and the books that can speak to us and guide us with it. And so, how in the world did you become a life coach? Like, it's an interesting journey on here. How do you go
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
lawyer to stay-at-home mom to, uh, you know, uh, Robert Kiyosaki follower and cash flow
Yes.
positive, Rich Dad
Yes.
Poor Dad?
Yep. Yeah. So the arc was, we actually did, we'd been doing real estate investment accidentally, because we were married in 2010. So nobody wanted to buy our houses. And so we just kept them and made long-term rentals out of them. And then made a decision when I left law that we would take some of our savings and start investing it in real estate. And so that was the beginning. But then I started doing, because we needed that little gap. We weren't covering our expenses, and so after reading Kiyosaki's book, I ended up going to a direct sales business and starting to coach and lead. And while I loved the work itself, my favorite part, I always called it my little secret. Like, you think that you're going to, you think that you're going to this party, right? And learning about this product. That was the type of business I did at the time. And the secret was that what I really wanted is to sew into their lives and help them identify like what their dreams are, who they really want to be, how I can be praying for them. And so that mentor piece, like people always ask, what do you want to do when you grow up, when you're in high school? And for me, all I knew to say was I want to sit across the table from someone at a coffee shop and hear their life story and their hopes and dreams, and then help them move the needle towards that, right? Close the gap between where they are and where they want to be. So that's coaching, but I didn't want to go back into a one-on-one client coach relationship in that season of my life, because I wanted to have full flexibility to raise my babies and have my babies and all of that. So the kind of like stopgap that I had for many years was the coaching that I was able to do through the direct sales business that I was a part of, where I would gather my girls on our calls, and we would talk through what they wanted and how to help them get it. And so I've been doing that for over a decade. And then over the course of the past year, I actually got a certification where it was like, okay, now I can help anybody. You don't have to join my team. You don't have to be part of my business. Whatever it is that you want, like, let's close that gap. So became official.
Oh, that's great. And I know after listening to another podcast that you're on, journaling is a big part of your personal growth, maybe reflection as well. Tell us more about that, because I think that's like a really practical skill that, I mean, anyone can do. What is it about journaling that provides for you? Hey everyone, Justin Thomas here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Become a Provider. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about an exciting new ministry and an opportunity to make a real difference in someone's life. We're launching the Provider Fund through the C.L. Thomas Fellowship nonprofit. This fund is designed to support individuals by covering the cost of a direct primary care membership for 1 year. This membership will allow them to work closely with a medical provider and invest in their health, something we believe is crucial for everyone. Our goal is to raise $1,200 to fund this initiative, and we need your help to make it happen. If you feel moved to contribute, please visit clthomasfellowship.org to donate. Your generosity will provide someone with the resources they need to improve their health and well-being. Together, we can make a significant impact. And my wife and I will match any donations up to the first $1,200. So that way, we can not only give one person a direct primary care membership, we can do two. Go to clthomasfellowship.org if you'd like to donate towards the Provider Fund. Now back to the show.
Oh, it's so funny. My 8-year-old was just asking, why do I write my prayers? And because I write in cursive, so she has no idea what it says. And it was helpful to just put that into words, because nobody's before you today. So of course the Lord knew, right? Nobody had asked me that for years. So for me, having a little bit of a busy brain, it slows me down, where you can only think as fast as the pen can move. And so that pace brings me into a more contemplative state. I always journal with 2 pens. So I write what I want to say to the Lord. And then I really endeavor to get quiet and just say, like, what do you have? What do you have to say to me? Like, what word do I need to know? Who needs my help today? How can I be present? And sometimes what comes out of those times is absolutely life-changing. Like, I was one way and am now another through the process of those prayers. So I've been doing it since my late teen years, and it's a part of pretty much a daily routine.
Thank you for sharing. It's nice to get these nuggets of these transformative practices that maybe we just take for granted because they're a habit and you don't have to think about it
Right.
anymore. And it takes a child to say, "Hey, why are you doing that, mommy?" Or,
Yeah.
an excuse like we're having now of a podcast chat
Right.
of like getting to know what is it about you that makes you tick? What is it about you that maybe we can learn from and be inspired by? And so the journaling with 2 colored pens, that is fascinating. Any
Yes.
memory of how you came up with that idea or inspiration behind that?
So a mentor of mine did the same thing, and she had more of an artist bent to her, so she found it very beautiful. She would buy beautiful journals, and sometimes they would be like art books, and she would journal with the curve of the art book or whatever, of the picture. For me, I'm practical. I'm a lawyer, right? So it really is like I want the lined paper, but I love the two colored pens because it just reminds me of his presence, that it might be that the Holy Spirit has something to say to me today. And just as an example, I was in a season probably about 6 months ago where I was just really, really disappointed by how things had turned out in an area of my life, and in a few where I was like, I should be further by now. It should look different by now. And I just, I was like railing against my circumstances. And as I was praying, I felt the Holy Spirit say, "You have not learned to love the tomb." And I was like, what does that mean? And he talked about the beauty of the silent place between death and resurrection. And he said, you're trying to whitewash it. You're trying to make it pretty, like a place you want to hang out for a long time, instead of just looking around and accepting that you're living in the gap between what was and what will be. And it's stark, right? It's empty, it's hollow, it's there's no light coming in. And yet his presence is there too, comforting, guiding, being with us while we grieve. And then there's that shift into hope. So rather than sitting in the tomb and going, it's fine, everything's fine right now, to really sit in the desolation and go, it's not what I hoped it was. And yet then we crack the door and say, light is coming. There's a new birth coming. And it just, I'll never forget that. Right? That wasn't me. I didn't have that within me to unearth. It was a new perspective that I needed desperately in that moment.
Wow, that is a great word, and another example of why it's important for us to just be open to listen. And then when we hear those words that we know are not from ourselves, that's a nice sign. I've told the story about how I came up with the C.L. Thomas Fellowship, where I was just in the shower the week of my father's passing, and then the word fellowship just pops into my mind, and I think to myself, I never use that word. Like, what does that mean? And then it's just like you kind of unpack that, just like you unpacked it. Of oh, that tomb and that gap, that this is what it means, and to be okay
Mm-hmm.
with the season. I couldn't help but think about the story parable, well, not the parable, but the actual story of Lazarus, in the tomb and coming out. And I
Yes.
just watched that chosen episode with my family, and it's like so powerful to really think about that happening, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And just that he could have stopped the death, but he wanted to invite us into, there's something bigger than healing the sick that's available here. Like there's truly resurrection power available. And the gift that was coming before his own resurrection, so that the disciples could look back and go, oh, he did it before, here it is again. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
And so if you had that thought 6 months ago, how have you lived that out? I mean, you get a word, which is awesome and
I
amazing.
know.
And so we're 6 months later. Do you still feel like you're in that gap, or how has that word helped you get through this time?
It there's something about loving the death that just invites the resurrection, right? Like when we stop railing against it and fighting it and just going, okay, like it's okay here. So there in some aspects my circumstances have changed. Like there were some business pieces that have started to lock into place. There were some family pieces that are still unsettled. Human beings, it takes a long time for us to shift into new spaces, right? And so when we're parents, we're on like the decades and generations plan as much as we want to be on the weeks and months plan. It just doesn't work that way. And so
Hmm.
it's funny though, because when I think about that word, I feel like the what's the way to say it? It's like I've stopped looking at what's dead, and I've started seeing the little sprouts, where I'm just like, oh, it's not what I want. Like what I want is basically like what we all want, kind of perfection, right? I want it all settled all the time, everything, right? Now, please. And what he gives us instead is his presence in it. And so it was like once I knew he was, because and I think this is common for us as human beings, and especially when we have the Lord, we can kind of feel like, oh, if things aren't in good order in this area of my life, maybe I'm missing something. Like he wants to fix it, but I'm sinning, or I'm like unwilling. And so what do I need to fix? And what I feel like he was telling me in that, like, you're trying to whitewash the tomb instead of just being here, was there are, like, it's okay for it to be unfinished. And I'm with you there. And if it were supposed to look different in my sovereignty, I can do that, right? Like, you don't have to really beat yourself up because you're in the tomb. Like, just be with me here. And that's the path to shift out, but that's also the path to contentment while you're, in the areas where you're still going to be there for a while. So it's like that conversation really settled the thing. And some of the circumstances as a result have shifted, but some haven't. And that's still okay, which is just amazing.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing. And one thing that we haven't touched on is your whole homeschool journey. I mean, that's a big part of your story as
Yes.
well. So we talked about you
Yes.
being at home, but
Mhm.
you decided, oh, I'm all in on home life. I'm going to
All in.
homeschool, and that seems to have yeah, and that seems to really influenced your work today. Where I believe,
Mhm.
and tell me if I'm wrong, like you have a really heart for homeschool parents
Yes.
and moms there. So tell us about what you've learned as a homeschool parent.
Yeah. So we have 4 children, and they're ages 6 to 12, and oh man, they are a wild bunch. They're a very wild bunch. And so we kind of, I had this vision that we would be the sit on the blanket in the park, kind of marveling at the beauty of creation family, and we're just not that family in the slightest at all. I've got 3 real wild ones of my 4. So, what I've settled on with homeschool is we are about 2 things in our home. We are about loving the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And we are about being intellectually curious. We're going to be curious and open to the world around us. And those 2 things together also kind of settle into a third concept that I think is subsumed under the first 2, which is this idea that it's important that we know who we are, who God made us to be, and that we steward well the gifts He's given us. So I don't know. I would say, which is, it's been hard for me as a lawyer to lay this down, but I don't know that we have the most intellectually rigorous homeschool kind of journey that I'm taking my kids on, but they know what their gifts are and they know who they are. And then there's a little bit of like, uh, I guess, arrow, um, like pulling the arrows to help shoot them straight, to go, okay, you're not going to do well sitting at a desk. Please don't do that as a career. And you, little one, are not going to do well if you're not
Mhm.
able to like do something really creative. And so my goal as a homeschool mom is to really help them launch from our home in a way that my husband and I didn't know to do. We didn't know what we liked and didn't like. So that was the arc of our 20s and 30s, was figuring that out. For our children, they know who they are, and they know that their job now is to magnify the Lord through their gifts and talents. So that's our homeschool philosophy. Basically, it looks a lot messier than that day to day, but in the back of my mind, that's always the tape that's playing. Who are they? What do they need? What would they love to do? How can I help them get around the things that they would just excel at and shine at?
Hmm. That is great. And I think I shared this with you, but just so the listeners know as well, during the, I guess, 2020 springtime, our daughter was in kindergarten and then was sent home. And then we thought, maybe Zoom kindergarten isn't the best thing for our family and daughter. And that led us on this journey of becoming an unexpected homeschool family. And my wife tells
Yes.
it the best way, where she said, I'm a redhead. Like I'm never teaching because I've got such a temper. And she is a loving woman and doesn't have a big temper like that, but she's got that redhead streak in her. So we're in the journey with you.
Yes, yes, it's very sanctifying. And I think that's the other thing that people don't always, we decide, can I homeschool or can I not homeschool? And it all depends on what you regard homeschooling as. If you regard homeschooling as school at home, not everybody can do that, right? You're not cut out for it. It's not your bent. But if you ascribe to the theory that maybe homeschooling is about this submission to kind of this process of communal sanctification. how can we all look more like Christ, then it can be a little messy, and that doesn't mean that we're wrong.
Hmm. So I always like to ask my guests this question, especially from what you just mentioned about the craziness of making career changes and also the energy it takes to lead a family through the homeschooling journey. How are you providing for yourself in this season? It could be practical,
Mm.
spiritual, something that you've done for a while, or something fresh and new. How are
Yeah.
you trying to provide for yourself?
So I'm leaning into this practice that is very uncomfortable to me, but I feel like it's kind of the next threshold of spiritual growth, which is learning to work from rest and learning to work from a place of trust and abiding instead of this, type A personality just beat against the wall until it breaks. So that looks a lot more like when I sit down to work, I really try to pray and ask the Lord, like, how can I love well? Who needs me today? How can I serve? What does service look like? As opposed to every day I do a post and every day I do 2 stories and every day I reach out to so many people. Those things, I'm aware of those practices and those, like, those I guess rules for the road, but I'm trying to lay those down and really trust, okay, the Lord makes my connections. The Lord, my work is to glorify him. And so if he wants me to do something unexpected, like go to the grocery store and there's going to be a chance encounter there that's, divinely appointed for me to serve and bless somebody, that's okay. That can be my work today. And he can work out, what that looks like financially. That's his business. So that's how I'm providing for myself, by no longer no longer providing for myself in quite the normal way, I guess.
Hmm. Yes, amen to that. That is a great challenge. Just start the day off by praying, like, "Hey, what should I do?" Or, "Give
Yeah.
me some insight here," versus just going after it. I could totally
Yeah.
relate to that as well. Um, but Anna, was there anything else that you wanted to reflect on your provision story before we wrap up here?
I just want to take a moment and say, I think one, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, so much of provision, of being a provider, it's like we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us and we're upheld by those around us. And so, one of the things I think is so beautiful that you're doing by bringing a lot of different voices together is it really exemplifies the fact that whatever we are because of the community around us. And so, I honor my husband for all that he made possible for me, even just being willing for me not to be a lawyer anymore, to walk away from the comfort and stability and security that brought and go rogue and say, who knows how this is going to work out? Like, we'll live in the basement if we need to, right? And and then all of the community that shouldered around me, the books that I read. And so, and I've heard you bring that up so often in podcasts of just what,
Mm.
what has sown into you. And so I think that's so important for us to remember as we walk out our provider journey is we're not alone. And when we lean into the people that the Lord has placed around us, really powerful things start to happen.
Boom. That's wonderful. Well, how can people connect with you if they wanna learn more about your story, your coaching, your podcasting? What's a
Yeah.
good place to connect?
Yep. So I have a website, sheconsidersafield.com, and everybody can find me all the places from there: social media, Facebook group. I have a guide that helps people cut through the overwhelm in their lives so we can get connected that way. So just pretty much any place where people are, I'm there, and you can find me the best way just through that website.
Hmm. This has been a delight. Thank you for the time and sharing today, Anna. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you for listening to the Become a Provider show. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to continue your journey in servant leadership, I invite you to sign up for my free weekly newsletter, Always Provide. Head over to alwaysprovide.org to subscribe. Each week, you'll receive insights, inspiration, and practical tips to help you grow as a servant leader and provider in all areas of your life. Before we wrap up, I'd like to remind you that this podcast is a ministry of the C.L. Thomas Fellowship, a nonprofit organization created to honor my late father, an exemplary provider. The fellowship is dedicated to providing free resources that inspire parents and leaders to emulate Jesus as a servant leader and provider. Your support helps continue this important work. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, we're all called to be providers. Let's make a positive difference by serving others. Keep blessing and protecting. This podcast is also brought to you by Yenin Art. Max Yenin, the co-founder of Yenin Art, is a talented graphic designer who I've partnered with for years on a variety of projects. He designs the thumbnails for this show, and he can create anything from logos to billboards, so connect with Max and his team at yenin.art. That's Yenin, YENIN.art. He has also been a guest on this show. You can see episodes number 52 and number 89 to hear more of his story.